Welcome to Literature Live, Brightness of Books. These are sessions in which we bring books and authors to brighten our dark days. And today, we've got two sterling people just about to come up. First of all, I'd like to thank our partners, Westland Books and Reliance Industries for supporting this. What we are going to do is discuss Pavan Varma's new book, which is on Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas. All of you probably know Pavan Varma, but very, very briefly, he's with the Indian Foreign Service, with the ambassador, he's been member of parliament in Rajya Sabha, director of Nehru Center in London. His last book was a much acclaimed book on Adi Shankaracharya. Speaking to him will be Devdutt Pattanaik, who's described as an illustrator for some reason in Google, whereas that's one of his minor qualities. He's a mythologist, very well-known mythologist. A mythologist is not someone who makes up myths, but who explores some myths. He's an author, best-selling author, and I think he deals very strongly with the willful misrepresentation of our scriptures. In a sense, both Pavan and Devdutt are iconoclasts. And here they are. I'm going over to both of you. Devdutt, please take over.
Thank you. I think my voice is coming on someone. So today we're going to discuss this wonderful book, The Greatest Ode to Lord Ram, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas, Selections and Commentaries by Pavan K. Varma. So I've known Pavan for a long time. I first met him when he was ambassador at Bhutan. And since then, I really know of Pavan from my college days when I read a wonderful book on Krishna written, and he doesn't realize the influence that book has had in my writing. So Pavan, thank you for being, we don't realize how we influence other people's lives, and we write books, and these books, like this book, will be read by someone out there, and who knows, the next great scholar on Ramayana may emerge simply because he's read a simple book which gleans out. For what I got from the book was, it is not the entire Tulsi Ramcharitmanas, but it gleans out portions of the Ramcharitmanas and presents it to a modern audience. So my first question is, why Ramcharitmanas and why now?
Well, thank you, Devdutt, first for your very kind words of appreciation and unexpected acknowledgement of the impact that one of my books, which I wrote many years ago, had on you. Without even my impact, you would have emerged as a writer of great depth, insight, and eminence. But it makes me feel happy. So thank you. Now, as far as your question is concerned, Devdutt, I'm concerned about something. I'm concerned about the fact that many Hindus, and not only Hindus, many of us are not aware of the remarkable civilizational and cultural legacy of Hinduism. We are in our own ways practicing Hindus, but Hinduism does not prescribe a certain code of conduct. Hinduism does not have one church, one pope, one text, one prescriptive ritual. So in our own way, we continue to be Hindus, but somewhere it has also led, among other reasons which I don't want to discuss now, to Hindus becoming gradually adrift from the richness of their civilizational and cultural legacy, of which Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas, I believe, is a very important segment. Anil mentioned that my last book was on Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's greatest thinker, which was one way of bringing to a modern audience the remarkable cerebral quality of this man in the 8th century and the philosophy which he espoused and which he explained, which is Advaita. Many people didn't know, for instance, I'm sorry, I'm slightly digressing, but I'm coming to the point immediately, that Adi Shankaracharya lived in the 8th century of the Common Era. He was born in Kerala and died in Kedarnath. In the 32 years that he lived, he set up 4 mutts in Sringeri, in Dwarka, in Puri, in Joshimath in the north, which is in a way the civilizational map of India. So, in a sense, it was a discovery for Hindus. Similarly, Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas, at least for much of North India, has been called and is probably the Bible of Hindus. It is, of course, an epic, 12,800 lines over 1,000 stanzas or verses. So, very few people read the Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas. Many of us know some lines of it. Now, what was my purpose? My purpose was that even if you don't read the epic from the beginning to the end, can I bring to a curious audience, hopefully, selections from it, which I have chosen. So, of course, they bear my stamp of selectivity, but which, in my opinion, nevertheless, are some of the most scintillating lines from the Ramcharitmanas. So, to bring them in an abbreviated format, let us say, of the epic, but which retains the overall structure of the epic, and to provide an English and a Hindi translation, and then to provide a commentary on the stanza so selected so that people get to know the context, the background, the meaning of what those lines are. And that was my real purpose of writing Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas.
So, I'll delve straight into the book because, the book is designed in an interesting way through a series of dialogues. And what I would like to begin with, thing which really caught my attention is very 21st century, which begins with, characteristics of the wicked and salutations to them. It's sarcastic in a way. It's like he first, of course, salutes the noble beings, and then he talks about these mischievous, wicked beings. And I'll just read the English translation, and perhaps you could sort of help us with that. Is again, I greet with a sincere heart. Look, I mean, I can actually see a man standing on stage with this, look in his eyes, saying, again, I greet with a sincere heart the malevolent class who are hostile without purpose, even to the friendly, to whom others' loss is their own gain, and who delight in others' desolation and wail over their prosperity. This sounds so familiar. This is not 400 years old. This is today.
Dev, that circumstances change or don't change, nor do people. When Tulsidas wrote Ramcharitmanas, there were 2 things that could attract for him the envy or the critique or the anger of his peers or contemporaries. One is that although well versed in Sanskrit himself, he consciously made the choice of not writing Ramcharitmanas in Sanskrit as was done by Valmiki when he wrote the Ramayana sometime between the 5th century BC and the 1st century BC. Tulsidas chose to write in Awadhi, which is the language of the common person. So in a way, he democratized the tradition of Maryada Purushottam Ram. Now he knew that he would win the opprobrium, the hostility of many who believed that Sanskrit alone was the language in which scholars should write about and project what is the wisdom of Hinduism, as indeed Sanskrit was in the past. But we must understand, and here again a great fallacy arises with people like Wendy Doniger and others, or even if I may say so with great respect to him, Sheldon Pollock, who's otherwise done pioneering service for Indian Hindu culture and for Sanskrit. They think that Sanskrit was only the language of the elite and was exploitative by definition. But they don't understand that Sanskrit, even in its heyday, at a time when the epics or the Vedas were actually being recorded in Sanskrit from an oral tradition, very soon moved into Prakrit, which was again the language of the masses. And frankly, after Jayadev's Geet Govind, sometime in the 12th century Common Era, just 800 years ago, there was an outpouring of devotional Hindu literature in languages other than Sanskrit. For instance, Chandidas wrote in Bengali, Vidyapati wrote in Maithili, Bihari wrote in Brij, Surdas wrote in Brij, Govindas wrote in Brij, and carrying forward the same tradition, Tulsidas wrote in Awadhi. So first he had to face the criticism of the old schools, scholars who believed Sanskrit should be the vehicle. Secondly, he was a relatively new and unknown entrant into the Ramayan ecosystem. He's called today Goswami Tulsidas. And there are people who have said that he was the greatest man of his age. Vincent Smith has said as great as Akbar, for instance. I mean, whether you take these certificates or not is not important for me. He was certainly a very, very influential voice. But initially he came in without that label of coming from a certain background and speaking about Ramcharitmanas about Ram. So he attracted criticism. And that criticism runs into anecdotal instances. For instance, it is said about Tulsidas that because people did not give value to the Ramcharitmanas, they placed it in the Vishwanathji Mandir in Varanasi, in Kashi, at the bottom of a pile of books on Ram, Maryada Purushottam Ram. But when the doors opened of the temple in the morning, it was on the top of the pile with Shiv himself writing Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Now these could be also stories by which he sought to legitimize his reason for writing in Awadhi. But he also needed to deal with his critics, the trolls of those times, as you said to me earlier in the day. And his way of doing it was to first pay his salutation to the noble. You know, my selection starts with the praise of the good-hearted. Sadhu charit subcharit kapasu nirasa visat gunamay phal jasu jo sahidan par chidra dharava vandane jag jas gava. So this is good are like cotton who go through so much of trouble, spinning, needling, threading, ginning, but only help the needy by giving them cloth to cover themselves. Having done so, he takes on his actual potential or would-be critics. And he does it most sarcastically. And he does it devastatingly, Devdutt. He says the wicked are like, for instance, I'll give you two examples. He says, are they like that fly who will fall into a bowl of ghee in order to spoil it, even though it knows that it will die itself in the process.
Wow.
This is his way of describing them. Or they are like the hailstorm, which will fall to destroy the crops, even though it knows that in the process it will melt and die away.
Wow.
His imagery is just remarkable. And by the way, Ramcharitmanas, I should have explained this earlier. The reason for me to write on this among my many other books now is that it's important at three levels, Devdutt. Firstly, It is a story of Maryada Purushottam Ram, who has a certain place in the philosophical and devotional tradition of Hinduism. Secondly, while it tells the story, it's a very important book in terms of a philosophical dialogue, which is the essence of Hinduism, of which I will talk later if you would like, Nirgun, Sagun and Bhakti. And thirdly, it is full of really down to earth wisdoms which are distilled over time and which come to you through this book. So Tulsidas, Ramcharitmanas, his literary ability, that's just the sheer verve of literary. I mean, you've heard of Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhaj Man Harana Bhav Bhay Darunam Nava Kanja Lochan Kanja Mukh Pad Kanja Kar Kanjarunam. Now, just kind of poetry, just the sheer cadence of it. So he needed to take on his critics, and no one could do it better than him. Right in the beginning, he sets that aside.
What fascinated me, and you raised the point about this is a Ramayana, and what I find his need to include Shiva in the story, which is not traditionally done. This is something that you find later scriptures telling, but Shiva becomes a very important character in Ramcharitmanas. And you see that in the way the story is told. It is, Shakti is being told the story. It's not taking it from the mouth of Valmiki. Even Valmiki Ramayana has its own origin story. This is a very Indian thing of saying that I heard it from so and so and so and so and so and so. It's, it's like a river of stories. But why Shiva? Is there any particular reason? Was it strategic or was it just poetry? There must be, here is a lot of strategy going on, like any other writer of his time.
You see, the schism or the gulf or the division or the difference of emphasis within the larger unified framework of Hinduism. Don't please be mesmerized by its diversities, as some Western observers in particular are, who then conclude that there is no such thing as Hinduism in the singular. Don't make that mistake. But yes, Hinduism allowed, nurtured, encouraged even a great deal of diversity. Among that was the Vaishnav and the Shaiva school, those who were followers of Vishnu and those who were followers of Shiv. Now, it never came to a situation except the most rare occasion when it led to violence or hostility. But there were definitely chiseled differences between the Vaishnav and the Shaiva. Now, what is Tulsidas trying to do? He is bridging this schism. He is saying that when I am writing this in the 16th century, it does not matter. Now, why does it not matter? It does not matter because Hinduism itself has now evolved beyond this to another level where what is important is not where you are coming from, but where you might go through the process of absolute devotion, surrender, bhakti, prapatti. Now it is not important, and it's not Tulsidas's business. He even, as I will explain later to you, wants to paper over the differences of philosophy within Hinduism, the Nirgun and the Sagun. His point of view is bhakti. So what does he do? Shiva becomes the narrator, and Sri Ram, who for Tulsidas is the god of all gods, prostrates himself before Shiva. It's a mutual admiration society. with no fetters on it, in order to project this importance primarily, that beyond this, what promises you moksha even in your own life, not later after death, is bhakti. So you will see that Shiva will say, for instance, Jai Ram Rama Ramanang Shamanang Bhavta Bhaya Kul Kahi Pahi Karam. I mean, he will praise Ram. Avadhesh Suresh Ramesh Vibho Sharanangat Mangat Pahi Prabho. And Tulsidas will praise Shiv. Namami Shami Shama Nirvana Rupam Vibhum Vyapakam Brahma Veda Swarupam Niham Nirgunam Nirvikalpam Niriham Chidaka Shamaka Shavasam Bhajam. So that whole beautiful, beautiful stotra in Sanskrit, incidentally, that Ram says about Shiv. So it bridges this earlier schism between Vaishnav and, the worship of Ram is Vaishnav. As you know, you are an authority bigger than me on this yourself. But Vishnu's incarnation, Ram and Krishna, and the Shaiv tradition. So he bridges that and does it quite successfully.
The thing is, when you're reading what little I have read, and really my exposure to Ramcharitmanas is very less. I always tell people that there are many Ramayans in India, and the Hindi-speaking people genuinely believe that this is the only Ramayana, until scholars have tried to show that there are many. Like, I'm from Odisha, and I'm naturally drawn to Odia Ramayans, and most Indians are familiar with the television version of the Ramayana, which uses a lot of Tulsi Ramayana. And in fact, it really is much of the songs that you hear, the Mangala Bhavana, everything has its roots in the Avadhi tradition, in the North Indian traditions. But this word bhakti that Tulsi uses, he uses with an extreme refinement. It is not divorced of intellectual understanding.
Oh, yes.
It is not divorced. There is jnana yoga. And that is, today when you use the word bhakti, it is isolated and seen as unconditional loyalty, to the point that they are even told to think for yourself is to go against the bhakti doctrine. You see these gurus propagating it, who expect unconditional loyalty, this kind of a divine, the Superman coming and telling you that you will do what it is. A very Paigambar concept. It is not Tulsi Ram. So this is, how did bhakti of Tulsidas become bhakti, which sounds more like you will listen to the Paigambar and you will not question authority.
No, I don't think it is. Tulsidas is making a case of bhakti not as a command, not as something prescriptive. He is saying it is the most efficacious, the most efficient way of achieving inner peace, harmony, contentment, and ultimately, even in your own lifetime, moksha from the vicissitudes of life, to become transcendent of both joy and sorrow, because in normal terms they are both transient and will pass. To rise above that, he believes bhakti is a very effective instrument, but he is not unaware of other ways of doing it, of achieving the same goal. He is only making a case by argumentation, not by fiat. The Jnana marg. See, there's Jnana marg, there is Karma marg, there is Bhakti marg. Hinduism's great eclecticism allows you to choose. My last book was about Adi Shankaracharya, who believed in the Jnana marg, the path of knowledge leading to moksha. Tulsidas is the path of bhakti. But first he takes on board And that is why it's not prescriptive. He takes on board the philosophical arguments of the past. There was a Nirguna school where the ultimate was conceived of as pulsating cosmic consciousness beyond attributes. As you know, it's defined akhand, indivisible, adrisht, unseen, nirguna, attributeless, purna, complete, nirvishesh chinmatram, undifferentiated consciousness. So it is visualized, conceptualized as that, and incidentally, the latest scientific discoveries in cosmology, in quantum physics, are proving that this kind of consciousness and its existence is true. But that apart, that's another session we will have. So Tulsidas takes into account the Nirgun tradition and takes into account the Sagun tradition, which says it is, yes, it is that pulsating consciousness, but that pulsating consciousness is not unyieldingly nirgun, without attributes, because it's too dry a concept for a devotee. He wants a deity. He wants a God with attributes to whom he or she can go, pray, and ask for something and also surrender. You need a deity. So after Shankaracharya, who pursued the Nirguna, Advait, non-dual doctrine, came Ramanuja, who said Vishisht Advait, not Advait, but Vishisht Advait. You see how everything in Hinduism is linked, although it appears diverse. And that is my essential point. So Vishisht Advait came with Ramanuja and was elaborated upon later by Nimbarkar and others, which said that attributeless, nirgun cosmic consciousness has the power within it to manifest itself. I'm simplifying it for the benefit of the devotee. Now, having taken those arguments on board, what is Tulsidas saying? The intellectual argument. He says, Ram is both Nirgun and Sagun. Aguna Saguna doi Brahma Swarupa. That pulsating consciousness is Brahm. So he says, Aguna Saguna doi Brahma Swarupa Akat Agat Anadi Anupa. That Ram, Agun and Sagun are only two aspects of that same Brahm. And Tulsidas then argues very beautifully. I'll just take a minute less to answer your question. He says, Phule Kamal, lotus, so hasar kaise. How this lotus flowers in the still waters of the lake. Phule Kamal, so hasar kaise, nirguna brahma saguna bane jaise. That means just as nirguna that becomes sagun, it is like the lotus emerging from the still cosmic consciousness of the waters of that lake. So therefore his argument is that there is no difference. Don't get caught in the ultimate differentiation between the two. What is important for you is to benefit from the benevolence of divinity. What is the best way to do so? Is not the philosophical quibble, which has its own importance, but the ability to transcend that in an act of informed surrender. He says, Aguna Arup Alak Ajajoi. Now, please, this is an important line to understand the answer to your question. Aguna Arup Alak Ajajoi. That which is attributeless, formless, imperceptible, alak, unborn. Bhagati prema bas saguna ho joy. Because of the love of the devotee, that attributeless, nirguna, divine, cosmic consciousness assumes form. Nirguna, Brahma, Saguna, Bane Jaisa. It assumes form. Once it has, and representing both. So don't get into that trap. What is it that you seek? What you seek is salvation. Surrender to that with faith. He says, Janani Janak. Very beautiful 4 lines. I'm tempted now that you have prompted me to this. Janani Janak, parents. Bandhu, friend. Sut, son. Dara, spouse. Janani Janak, Bandhu, Sut Dara, Tana Dhana Bhavana, house, Suhadra, Parivara, and family. Relatives, family, son, wife, child, dhan, sabki mamata, the attraction for all of them. Sabki mamata, bandh, sabki mamata, tag batori, weave them all into a cord. Mama pad man hi bandh bari dori, and tie that cord with surrender at my feet. And having done it, you will be rid of attachment, of anger, of envy, of discontent, of agitation, because bhakti itself becomes the stepping stone towards possibly that peace of mind which is preparatory to moksha. So it's an intellectual act.
See what happens if I'm reading the book and I'm asking, how does one differentiate bhakti to Ravan from bhakti to Ram? Because Ravan, the description of Ravan which emerges, he uses exactly the same assumptions. I am greater than Ram. So in our normal day-to-day life, कैसे पता चले कि हम जिसके साथ हम भक्ति कर रहे हैं, हमारे सामने क्या वो राम है या रावण है, क्योंकि मुंह में राम राम, बगल में कुछ और.
नहीं, देखिए, रावण और राम में कोई एब्सोल्यूट डिफरेंस नहीं है. Again, sorry to my answers to you have to become a little more complex than simple replies, because that is the nature of Hinduism. You see, Hinduism refuses to treat you as a child. While it values childhood, the simplicity of a child in the rite of devotion. Pandityam nahi, balyam theek hai. Don't be a pandit, be a child. But it does not treat you as a child where moral choices are concerned. There are no 10 commandments in Hinduism. What is right and what is wrong depends on context, on circumstance, on the situation, and the karmas of each of them in their past and the choices they make in the present. So in that sense, Ravan is also a great devotee of Shiv. But while being a great devotee, and when he dies, the heavens rain down flowers on him. Paradoxically, that happens to Duryodhan in the Mahabharata also. The heavens rain down flowers on him, saying, Kya yodha tha? He did his karma and did it well. So Hinduism in that way can perplex you because of a simple reason, Devdutt. There cannot be absolute right and wrong in man-made laws. What is right for some people is wrong for others in the same societies that we live in different cultures. So Ram is for Tulsidas, I can say, Ram is the embodiment of all that is good. That is why he is called Maryada Purushottam Ram. He is the ultimate role model of right conduct. Ravan is not. For reasons which are evident from the story of the epic, the way he abducts Sita, and his sense of arrogance. Now, one thing I want to say about Ram is that, again, this is not happenstance. Tulsidas portrays him as a god who is in any circumstance full of equipoise, of equanimity. In a sense, he's transcendent to such polarities as anger and joy. He behaves like a human being. When he sees Sita, for instance, he is overcome by his admiration of her beauty and his love for her. But this brings another concept of Hinduism, that is Leela. When the divine plays the human with such conviction, it is Leela. It is Godhood playing the fool. So, in that sense, Ram is goodness and Ravan is not. Now, if you wish, and there are people in India who worship Ravan, and they are part of Hinduism, by the way.
So, when you talk about Ram and Ravan, Sita comes into the picture. And Ram here, in the absence of Sita, is completely shattered. He says, without my beloved, I can't think clearly. Is this to be seen as Leela?
Without doubt.
Or genuine pathos for the loss of the beloved?
God playing the fool. He knows the story in advance. He's the all-knowing. Sarva Pratyay Darshanan. He's the all-knowing. But he has undertaken a human avatar to play a role in order to leave certain inferences for men and women to follow or to think about. Hinduism always leaves the option not to follow but to think about, unless it is hijacked by illiterate bigots. It gives you that option. Think about. So when he's in the forest with Lakshman and Ravan has abducted Sita, Ram is, what could any husband emulate what Tulsidas, right? She's bereft. He's in agony. Ghana gamanda ghana garjat gora priya heen dar patman mora. Without my beloved Lakshman, I am afraid. This is that God who is all powerful saying, I am afraid. If this is not Leela, I don't know what it is. So he plays a human role to perfection.
So how is Tulsi's Ram similar to Hindutva's Ram?
No, you see, there is an attempt to use Ram in the current context for political goals. In itself, it is not either absolutely bad or unknown. Religion has always been used to achieve a certain secular goal as an inspiration, or as even our soldiers, when they go to the border for a charge, when they know certain death could stare them, they pray to Devi, they pray to Ram, they pray to whoever their Isht Devata is. So I'm not saying that. What is wrong is, in my view, what is the difference between Maryada Purushottam Ram as I know him and his irrational weaponization? First of all, Ram is not a passive God. Let's not assume that. Hinduism may have been passive for too long, but Ram is not. He fights against injustice. He takes up arms against injustice. But Ram is Maryada Purushottam precisely because he will not be angry against the innocents or use violence when unnecessary or take the law into his own hands or be angry or vengeful. He's not that. He's not that. That's the beauty of the whole definition of Maryada Purushottam Ram, unlike Leela Purushottam Krishna. So Maryada Purushottam Ram is always in equipoise. Even when gross injustice is being done to him. Not that he will accept injustice, but he will not react with irrational anger or unnecessary vengeance. That's my point. So when Ram goes to Kaikeyi, who has had him banished for 14 years and his throne taken, what does Ram tell Kaikeyi? He should be very angry. In modern terms, he should have been exceptionally rude to her, even been violent to her. What is this? You are exploiting a vow given by my father to take away what is rightfully mine. What does he say to her? He says, Sun Janani, soi sut bada bhagi. Listen, mother, that child is blessed. Sun Janani, soi sut bada bhagi, jo pitu mat bachan anuragi. Who has an opportunity to follow with love the command of his or her parents. And with that, he goes into exile and comes back ultimately victorious. When he is born, for instance, what does Tulsidas sing? Bhai Pragata Kripala, the merciful, Deen Dayala, Kaushalya Hitkari. Every day on Ram Navami, a lot of North Indian Hindu families still sing this song. So he is merciful. He is the protector of the weak. Deen Dayala. And what does, for instance, Ram tell Bharat? As part of the discourse, the many dialogues, because Hinduism itself is a dialogue. So Ram says to Bharat, Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai. Oh Bharat, my brother, there is no greater virtue than the welfare of others. Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai, par pida sam nahi athmai. And there is no greater evil than injury to another. Now this is Maryada Purushottam Ram. My problem sometimes with those who use the slogan Jai Shri Ram in moments of avoidable violence, or when violence is the result of a few against the weak, or even when it is to inflict unnecessary violence, is that you don't know the notion of Maryada Purushottam Ram.
We are running out of time, so this is the last question. And we'll step out a bit from the book to Pavan Varma, the person. And you have been in the bureaucratic space, in the diplomatic space, you are in the political space. In my personal experience, every politician, when cornered, says they are doing Leela. So, but Bhagwan Leela करते हैं, क्या जो लीला करते हैं वो भगवान है? आप टिप्पणी जरा दीजिए.
एक तो मैं लीला के काबिल नहीं रहा हूं अभी, क्योंकि लीला happens when you are above the polarities of life, when it is sheer play with no ulterior purpose. You are not seeking reward, and you cannot ever be without benediction. You are God. You play Leela for the sake of the sheer joy, the verve, exuberance. Sorry? Yeah. So, therefore, I am not capable of that Leela, but being now in public life for many years after being a diplomat,
I don't think he's putting me on.
I believe that you do what you think is right. And in that sense, some of the decisions I have taken, and I am no paragon of virtue, I believe in thinking what is the best thing to do. In that sense, perhaps we are all inspired in our own little ways, even though we may or may not admit it, by Maryada Purushottam Ram, while, and this is why Hindus are harmonious schizophrenics. They are both Maryada Purushottam Ram and they are Leela Purushottam Krishna. They believe in the sheer notion of Ananda. I often say what distinguishes what distinguishes Buddhism and Hinduism,
Brother Pattanaik.
which are so similar in many ways. Buddhism being a beautiful, enlightened tributary flowing from the the river of Hinduism. Uh, but the Hinduism is essentially defined by the one word, Ananda, joy, Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham Shivoham, and I am God because I am capable of experiencing that same unalloyed, unblemished bliss and joy in this life. And Buddhism is very similar metaphysically to Hinduism with a difference of emphasis. That beej word of Buddhism is dukkha, sorrow, and the way out of sorrow. So Hinduism, it's ananda, joy. Buddhism, it's dukkha, sorrow.
Okay, thanks so much, Pavan and Devdutt. I think you brought a lot of Anand into our lives just now. That was brilliant. And the way I think Tulsidas's poetry, the way you recited it, the rhythms were incredible. And I wish I could do the same, you know. I must learn it somehow.
Anil, my first book was on Ghalib. And so one of the other things I can do is to recite a great amount of Urdu poetry as well. But because they are all good literature. But these days I am quite enmeshed with Hinduism.
Right. But there are lots of questions. We'll try and fit in as many as possible. We may go a little over time, so bear with us. Nikhil Nadigar asked a question which I think a lot of people would want to know. Valmiki Ramayana and Tulsidas Ramayana, are there any key concepts that have changed or any nuances that have been left out?
Well, essentially, the story, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Essentially, the stories are similar with differences in nuance. And Tulsidas, in spite of narrating a very popular and familiar story, brings in deftly and definitively his own impress on the writing of an epic. There are some differences, and that one of them is particularly in the minds of a lot of Hindus, which is that Valmiki's Ramayana ends with the Uttarakand, which is about what people perceive to be the humiliation of Sita by Ram. Whereas Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas does not have that section and ends with his return to Ayodhya and to his Abhishek or his assumption of the throne.
So it's a happier ending.
Well, there is a lot of scholarly debate on whether the Uttarkand of Valmiki's Ramayana was written originally by Valmiki or added later by people who were more within the clasp of the social milieu. In other words, who wanted to reinforce gender stereotypes or gender exploitation or male patriarchy. And it is a fact that since Hinduism itself is at least to my mind a 6,000 or 5,500-year-old religion, there are many texts which were first oral, then committed to writing, then went through some changes. And many times we don't know what has happened to text. I mean, Kautilya's Arthashastra went completely out of the Indian consciousness. Finally, in the 19th century, a copy of it was discovered in a villager's home in Kerala. Whereas Machiavelli became a global hero. This is what happens to the unfolding of history.
Okay, Devashish Goswami says, did Tulsidas believe in unification of Hinduism?
Certainly. I can answer this with an emphatic yes, because Hinduism's you must see this in a very brief answer. Hinduism enables and allows diversity of thought. There are 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, not one. There are 13 principal Upanishads. No one knows who wrote them. Hinduism allows for dialogue, differences of opinion. Many people are so mesmerized by that diversity that they think that Hinduism itself is a collation of diversities and therefore not a unified religion. It's untrue. Underlying that diversity is a unity of vision, which any serious student of Hinduism will know. So even the lay person who is worshipping a rock under a tree is at one point making a divinity of a piece of stone, and at the same time is consciousness of the notions of Brahm, Maya, ignorance, and that ultimate consciousness, and can live peacefully with, the mind is like a chest of drawers. You pull a drawer and you pull another drawer, but it is part of a unified framework, which is the chest of drawers. It has many, many drawers to pull from. So I believe Tulsidas, by privileging surrender and bhakti after a debate on the other paths that could lead to moksha, unifies many strands of Hinduism. And this is one of the qualities of many people in Hinduism at periodic time. Shankaracharya.
Yeah, you brought that out in your book on Shankaracharya.
Sanmat Sthapak, I mean, he brought together Hinduism, although he was the proponent particularly of one aspect of it, which is Advait Hinduism.
Now here's a question to both of you from Nikhil Nadgar. Why is Ram used a lot more in political discourse more than Krishna? Both had dharma-based kingdoms. Devdutt, you want to go first?
Well, Krishna has to dance with women, and most politicians don't know how to dance. I guess that is the simplest explanation, because to be comfortable with powerful women, young, old, mothers, sisters, to see women as equal, not through the gendered lens, is something that Krishna does very comfortably. It is very difficult for most men raised in a particular way. And I think politicians, not all politicians, but I think it is the political language that sort of valorizes the boy. And the boy who is not able to be a man. And Purushottama is about being a man. So I think it is this journey from being a boy to a man, which transforms you into someone as Ram and Krishna. So also when they talk of Ram, it's only lip service. It's not actually an understanding of Ram, as Pavan has been repeatedly stating. The sophistication of Ram is missing. It's just the lip service to Ram. It's a cosmetic Ram that you follow. So it's a cosmetic Ram. It's not I'm following Ram. I'm following a cosmetic, user-friendly, weaponized Ram, and completely oblivious. Even Krishna, therefore, the image I will show is that of him in the battlefield holding a Sudarshan Chakra in his hand, which is not an important story in the Mahabharata anyway. It's a minor episode where he uses the Sudarshan Chakra. But that's the image that is most weaponized by politicians. So it's not born of wisdom either way.
Pavan, you want to add to that?
I just want to say that Krishna and Ram, very interesting comparison. You know, in Hindu tradition, Krishna is called the Purna Avatar, the full incarnation of divinity, because he imbibes within himself all the 16 attributes of divinity. Ram is not a Purna Avatar. He is a partial avatar. He has 13 of the 16 attributes. He misses 3, and you can guess which of those are. These are the Shringar Ras, the sensual aspects of Krishna, where he can dance on the banks of the Yamuna with gopis as part of the Ras Leela, which Ram would be quite unable to do, as Devdutt said. But Ram is, I think, because of his rectitude and his single-mindedness in an epic war in which he was the central figure. Remember, Krishna in the Mahabharata is a counseling accessory to a Mahabharata. Ram, on the other hand, leads the battle and is the principal protagonist of achieving justice against what is perceived to be as evil. So, in a sense, he's better suited for appropriation by those who wish to use him. Because in Krishna, what would you do about a god who is so great that he steals butter as a child? As an adolescent, he is unbelievably precocious with the gopis, who dances the Ras Leela, who also gives the sermon of the Bhagavad Gita, and who cheats in the Mahabharata. By the way, Krishna cheats not once, but 3 or 4 times in the Mahabharata. His intention is good. That what is the goal? It is to win the war, not to prove yourself to be very righteous. So, in a sense, Krishna sets Mahatma Gandhi on his head. Mahatma Gandhi said the means are as important as the end. The real tradition in Hinduism, as Krishna symbolizes it, was the end is more important than the means.
Kaushik Kanjale asks, what's the difference between King Ram and King Bali? Both were great kings.
Yeah, I mean, that's another aspect of the Ramayana story which is controversial, because there are many proponents who believe that, in a sense, Ram was unjust with Bali by having killed him. But that is the story, and one of the reasons that Ram gives, which again Krishna may not have been able to give in absolute terms, Ram says that the cardinal sin Bali made was to marry or keep his brother's wife and to lay claim to and to indulge in acts which he believed to be not in conformity with virtue. So, in that sense, there is no comparison between Bali and Maryada Purushottam Ram, but many people consider that particular prasang or aspect of the Ramayana story to be controversial.
Devdutt, a question for you from Rushil Patel. What is your opinion of people trying to fit Hinduism to Abrahamic templates?
Well, they'll fail. That's the opinion, because it's like trying to put cricket in football. You can't take the cricket bat into the football stadium. It becomes a funny game which will be neither cricket nor football. But this need comes, and it is who is doing this? It's actually being done by Indians who have a low self-esteem and great shame about the Hindu traditions, and genuinely see masculinity in the Abrahamic traditions, and hence want to embrace Abrahamic masculinity through Indian masculinity. So it is this deep discomfort with the feminine side of Hinduism, which sort of has a comfort with the masculine and the feminine. Abrahamic traditions don't have a comfortable relationship with the feminine. There is no feminine. The divine, the prophets, everybody is masculine. So you see this new Hinduism that is emerging, the weaponized Hinduism, which is trying to be masculine, rejecting the feminine. Looks like this funny game that is neither cricket nor soccer.
From Ajit Pradhan, I don't understand the question. Pavan, perhaps you will. From Sitapati Ramchandra in Ragashri, when did the narrative change and we began chanting Jai Shri Ram instead?
Well, Jai Shri Ram has been chanted from time immemorial, but its meaning or its usage has changed in recent times. I can understand angst among Hindus by being unfairly treated by history, including, if I may add, and this may be controversial for you, by a lobby which is reflexively secularist without being rooted in any religion, including Hinduism. It's been wronged by history for other reasons as well. And a great part of its heritage has been irrevocably destroyed. And unfortunately, there is current generation neither has the curiosity or inclination to once again try and rediscover that rich civilizational legacy, which will not lead them towards simplistic notions of Jai Shri Ram only for political purposes. It will be a knowledge that enables them, when required, to fight against what they think is wrong, but in ways that will be in conformity with a very, very rich tradition of Hinduism itself. So therefore, you will have the misuse of Jai Shri Ram when the bulk of the Hindus are adrift from the knowledge of Hinduism. Then the few people can come and appropriate for you what they believe based on their illiteracy of Hinduism to be what Hinduism should be. This is the danger. And they will not be willing for a dialogue, perhaps, because their ignorance may be exposed through a dialogue. Therefore, I say, it's important for Hindus to know more about their own, not only religious, not ritual, spiritual, metaphysical, philosophical legacy.
Do you think that is possible at all? Because it's so much easier to look at the superficial aspects than go into the spiritual aspects.
You know, Anil, it's not about possibility. It's about desire. It's certainly possible and it's certainly desirable. Because if you were a civilization which was born 200 years ago, and you know a little of it and you don't, there is time to rectify it. Or if you were civilizations like the Greek or the Persian or the Mesopotamian, who remain only as museum relics, you can forget it. Here is a living tradition which has evolved, which has adapted, which has gone through great setbacks but still managed to survive as a tradition. It's part of our lives. I think it's necessary, without being prescriptive, for Hindus to have a little more curiosity about their own faith. I think it's useful. That's the best antidote to its distortion.
Yeah, except that it needs some kind of a leadership to do that.
Well, you know, there can always be enough reasons for you not to do much. Either wait for the Messiah or the leader who leads you in the right direction. But I sincerely believe that ordinary Hindus, for instance, they read the Gayatri Mantra. And all of us, many Hindus, most Hindus will read the Gayatri Mantra. To know the meaning, the symbol, Devdutt has done so much work on such matters. To know a little more, you know, for instance, the first 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, Anil, you know, were not about godhood at all. They were not talking of divinity. They were talking about what could be the ultimate truth. They can be technically called atheist. Now, Hindus don't know anything of this. So I think, I mean, you know, you can wait for a leader eternally. You can wait for things to change external to you, or you can make some effort on your own as well. I think, for instance, I think my book Adi Shankaracharya was quite successful. It came out in 8 Indian languages. And it is these kind of things also which I help Devdutt's books, which take it to the people and probably ignite a little spark in them to know more.
I think the problem at the moment is that too many people too many leaders leading us the wrong way, in the wrong direction.
It's, you can say that. I don't think leaders have always led us into the right direction. For instance, I am a great admirer of Jawaharlal Nehru. But I believe he took us in the wrong direction when he had a viewpoint which defined progress only in categories of Western modernity. He looked at everything in the past as he calls it himself in the discovery of India, the deadwood of the past. His approach was that everything that happened in the past was superstition, prejudice, ritual. And therefore, India needs to move away from it. And his model of what it should move to was disproportionately influenced by Western norms of modernity. Only such a person can invite a near-failed architect from Paris called Corbusier to design a city in India and sustain the fact that that architect is so proud of the fact that he's come to help the natives that he won't even go and see some of the Indian cities to understand their ethos and ornamentation and sense of urban, not read any books. He took a twig on a wet piece of land and drew out the map of Chandigarh. Thank God the city has been Indianized. Otherwise, that horrific building of the High Court and the state executive and legislature, they're completely divergent from our traditions of architecture.
Okay, so we're saying that.
So I'm saying there are leaders can do many things. You don't have to, you must have the discrimination. I believe Nehru's concept of agnosticism as secularism was wrong. Mahatma Gandhi was a much better model who immersed himself in religion, all religions, especially Hinduism, to then come up with the conclusion that we must respect all faiths.
Preeti Gupta asked a question which echoes what Devdutt was saying earlier. Your views on Adi Nareshwar, significance in current times.
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
The Nareshwar.
You know, again, Hinduism is the only religion I know of, and Devdutt referred to it earlier, which actually elevates the feminine to the position even of the ultimate divine. I think in the 6th century CE, an important book called the Devi Mahatya was written, which said that the feminine is the ultimate divine, and that means the Devi. All our gods have consorts, from Mahadev to Brahm to Vishnu. And you have powerful women in their own way, in the form of Draupadi, Sita, and Radha. Just to mention a few, although there was a great deal of gender exploitation in a patriarchal society, you have the counter perspective, just that there was a Gargi who could, in an assembly of women, ask a leading question on philosophy. You had Mirabai who could revolt. You had Andal, and so on and so forth. I mean, you had Maitreyi. So in Hinduism, it's a mixed bag. And certainly there's, if you read only one aspect of the Manusmriti, it was open exploitation of women. But there are other aspects by which the female principle, the whole tantric school is based on Shakti. Uma or Parvati is Shiva's Shakti. Maya is that Shakti which from that attributeless consciousness produces, manifests, creates. So Ardhanareshwar comes from this concept, where Hinduism probably is the only great religion of the world which gives at the level of ideology, place and elevation to the divine, to the feminine principle.
Devdutt, you want to add to that?
Well, I think that we are a country that loves to worship women and talk good things about women. But when push comes to shove, we are a country which where the Supreme Court is not feeling awkward that rapists are being released, rape survivors are being put in jail, those who fight for, we are living in these awkward times and these need to be addressed. So while yes, worship of Ardhanarishwar is noble and great, let's put the money where the mouth is. And I think that is where scriptures really come. I can use words cosmetically, I can transform words into weapons, but to actually live the words and to actually manifest their meaning is another game altogether. So, when Tulsi talks about Nirguna and Saguna, he's talking about manifesting the unformed and our capability of dealing with the feminine and the masculine. So we have to move away from lip service. Lip is where the Brahmins came from. But the hands and feet are where things really happen. So I think we should be careful. We have to move away from the mouth and focus on the heart, the chest, the hand, the thigh, the feet, if we have to find our totality. So I think Indians have to move away from the speech.
Well, I think that's a very, very good note on which to end. There are many more questions, but we're already 15 minutes over time. So Pavan, do you want to say any closing remarks?
Well, I just want to thank you, Anil and Tata Literature Live, and of course, Devdutt, with whom talking one learns more than one is able to say to the audience. And I want to say, you cannot any longer make the choice of remaining perpetually either indifferent or incurious about civilizational aspects to where you belong. The world does not like photocopies. We don't like clones. At least they are not liked. You have to have some authenticity. So, for too long now, speaking good English has been the only definition in a sense of being educated and civilized. It's not going to wash anymore in this country. There's a backlash against it.
Well, thank you, Pavan Varma. Thank you, Devdutt Pattanaik, for a very enlightening and interesting session. And I also want to thank Reliance Industries and Westland Books for making this possible. Thank you.
Thank you.